Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Wednesday, December 17, 2025. First, Britt had finally managed to break free from the suffocating confines of the secluded resort, the place where she had been held under tight control for what felt like an eternity. Her escape had been hard-won, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but now she was back in Port Charles, reunited with her mother. The comfort of being home, of being in a place where she could finally breathe without the constant surveillance, brought her a sense of relief she had not experienced in months. Her mother's arms around her were meant to be the safety she so desperately needed, but little did Britt know, this was only the beginning of her true confrontation. The quiet joy of her return was quickly overshadowed by an unnerving feeling. It started as a vague unease, the kind you can't put a finger on but know is lurking in the background. As she settled back into her life, Britt couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was wrong. Port Charles was supposed to be her sanctuary, her haven from the chaos of her past, but it seemed the shadows she thought she had outrun had followed her home. It wasn't long before her instincts proved correct. In a chance meeting at the hospital, her worst fears were realized. The man who had been pulling the strings from behind the sinister man she thought was far out of reach was standing before her. Britt froze, her heart pounding in her chest as her eyes locked onto his. The sight of him was a cold reminder of the twisted games he had forced her to play. It was as if the world had tilted sideways, and in an instant, she was no longer in control. The fear that had haunted her for so long resurfaced, clutching at her throat. The man before her wasn't just an ordinary figure from her past, was the one who had orchestrated every torment, every decision, every moment of control she had lived under. Britt had hoped that by escaping the resort, she could put an end to it all. But now, standing in front of him once more, she realized she was never truly free. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and she could barely maintain her composure. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. The mere presence of this man made her feel small, powerless, as though the years of survival, of escaping, had been meaningless. He had always been just a phone call or a shadow away, lurking in the periphery of her life. Britt had hoped that leaving the resort would be her final act of defiance, but the encounter proved otherwise. The walls she thought she had torn down were still very much in place, and this man was the architect behind every single one of them. His presence felt like a suffocating weight, pulling Britt into a past she desperately wanted to leave behind. She tried to speak, to say something, anything would break the silence, but no words came. All she could do was stare at him, her body frozen in a mixture of fear and disbelief. This was not the reunion she had imagined with her mother. This was a nightmare she had hoped to never relive. The power he held over her mind was undeniable, and it made her feel as though every step she had taken toward freedom had been in vain. Britt's eyes darted around, seeking an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. She was trapped in the same cycle, the same dance of fear, manipulation, and control that she had thought she had broken free from. It was as though the very fabric of her freedom had been ripped apart by his reappearance. She had hoped for solace, for peace, for a fresh start, but instead, she was face to face with the one person who had made her life a living hell. The idea of confronting him, of standing her ground, felt impossible. Fear, old and familiar, was already taking hold. As the encounter continued, Britt's mind raced with memories of the past, of the long, sleepless nights spent under his watchful eye, the cruel words he had whispered, the threats that had weighed on her like chains. But there was one thought that stood out above all others: escape. This time, however, it would not be as simple as slipping away in the dead of night. This time, Britt had to face him, to confront the terror he had instilled in her. It was a battle she hadn't prepared for, and the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. How could she ever truly escape the ghosts of her past when they kept resurfacing, more menacing than ever? Second, Kai had always been cautious, but lately, the pieces of a dangerous puzzle were starting to fall into place. It was during a routine meeting at the office that he first began to notice the subtle clues that had been hiding in plain sight. Drew and Willow, both outwardly calm and collected, were acting strangely, their conversations laced with coded language and veiled threats. It wasn't until a private conversation between them caught his attention that the reality of what was happening hit him. The plan to take down Michael, a plan that Drew and Willow were orchestrating behind closed doors, had become all too clear. Kai felt the weight of the revelation pressing on him, the burden of knowledge now too heavy to ignore. He had never trusted Drew fully, but the depths of the deception now unfolding shocked him to his core. The more Kai reflected on the situation, the more disturbing the picture became. Drew, the man who had always presented himself as noble and honorable, was now revealed to be nothing more than a master manipulator. His motives, once masked by an air of professionalism, now seemed driven by something darker. Willow, too, was complicit in this web of deceit. Her role in the scheme was equally chilling, and Kai could not shake the sense of betrayal that surged through him. It was one thing to have a rivalry or a conflict, but this was something far worse. This was calculated, malicious, and aimed at someone who didn't deserve it. Michael had always been a person of integrity in Kai's eyes, and the thought that his friend could be taken down through such underhanded methods made his blood run cold. As the full scope of the plan unfolded in his mind, Kai began to feel the sense of danger growing stronger. The more he thought about Drew's cunning nature, the more he realized how far he would go to achieve his goals. Drew had always been the type to operate in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the scenes, and now that he had allied himself with Willow, the situation had become even more treacherous. The calculated steps Drew was taking to discredit Michael and ruin his reputation were chilling in their precision. It was a scheme designed to leave no trace, no opportunity for retaliation. Drew and Willow knew exactly what they were doing, and that made Kai's stomach turn with a mixture of fear and disgust. Kai was not one to sit idly by when it came to protecting those he cared about. He knew that if Michael were to fall victim to Drew and Willow's plan, it would not just ruin his life, it would devastate everyone who stood by him. But Kai also knew that exposing the plot would be no simple task. Drew and Willow had covered their tracks well, and one wrong move could set everything in motion, leaving Michael vulnerable and without any means of defense. Yet, the thought of letting this go on without intervening was unbearable. Kai couldn't stomach the idea of standing by while his friend was crushed by the very people who claimed to be on his side. He had to act, and he had to act quickly. Without wasting a moment, Kai set his plan into motion. He knew exactly who to turn to: Curtis. Curtis was someone who had the experience and the resources to deal with this kind of situation. Kai trusted him completely and knew that Curtis had the clout to help expose Drew and Willow's treachery. The conversation with Curtis had to be careful. Kai couldn't just throw accusations without proof. He needed to be strategic, to present the facts in a way that wouldn't immediately put Curtis on the defensive. But Kai had no doubt that Curtis would understand the severity of the situation and would take the necessary steps to warn Michael. As Kai waited for Curtis to arrive, his thoughts raced. The fear and anxiety that had built up over the past few days were now at the forefront of his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Michael, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing against him. It was almost as if the entire world was conspiring to bring him down, and Kai knew that without immediate intervention, Michael would be blindsided. The thought of seeing his friend suffer, knowing that it could have been prevented, gnawed at him. He couldn't let that happen. When Curtis finally arrived, Kai didn't waste any time. He explained everything: subtle clues, the conversations, the way Drew and Willow were systematically isolating Michael and undermining his position. Curtis listened intently, his brow furrowing in concentration as Kai laid out the facts. There was no denying the gravity of what was happening. Curtis, who had always been a protector of those he cared about, understood immediately that this was not just about business or personal conflict. This was about safeguarding Michael's future, and more importantly, protecting his family from the dangerous machinations of Drew and Willow. Together, they devised a plan. The first step was to gather more information, to ensure that they had everything they needed to confront Drew and Willow head-on. Curtis would take the lead, using his connections to track down any further evidence of their plot. Kai, meanwhile, would make sure that Michael stayed unaware of the looming danger for as long as possible. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Drew and Willow were calculating, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But Kai also knew that once the truth was out, Michael would have the chance to fight back, to protect his legacy and his family. The weight of the situation pressed down on Kai, but he knew there was no other choice. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became that Drew and Willow had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. They weren't just scheming to take down a powerful figure, they were willing to destroy everything Michael had built, all for their own gain. Kai couldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. Third, Chase and Dante sat across from each other at the small, cluttered table in the police precinct, their eyes locked on the stack of notes and evidence spread out before them. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of frustration and determination hanging in the air. They had both been working tirelessly to piece together the truth behind the shooting that had almost cost Drew his life. Drew had claimed, under pressure, that it was Michael who had shot him, a statement that had sent the investigation into a spiral, pointing all fingers in Michael's direction. But Dante and Chase weren't convinced. There were too many holes in Drew's story, too many inconsistencies that they couldn't ignore. Something about it just didn't sit right with either of them. As they examined the notes, both detectives noticed the same glaring discrepancies. Drew's initial statements were vague, filled with too many gaps, and his recollections seemed almost rehearsed. According to Drew, Michael had been the one to pull the trigger, but Dante, with his years of experience in criminal investigations, knew that things rarely lined up so neatly. He couldn't shake the feeling that Drew's accusations were an attempt to divert attention from something else, perhaps something even darker. They had to dig deeper, to peel back the layers of deception that Drew had cleverly woven. It wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about exposing the truth, no matter how difficult or dangerous that truth might be. Chase, the more methodical of the two, sifted through the pile of paperwork, looking for anything that could prove Michael's innocence. He had always trusted Michael, and although it was hard for him to believe that someone so close to him could commit such an act, he knew that the evidence had to tell the story. "There's something off here," Chase muttered, tapping his pen against the paper. "We know Michael wouldn't do this, but if we don't find a concrete alibi for him, the case will keep pointing back to him." Dante nodded, his jaw clenched in frustration. He shared Chase's instinct that Michael wasn't the shooter, but the accusation was serious, and they had to follow the evidence wherever it led. "Let's go over everything again," Dante suggested, pushing the notes towards Chase. "We've missed something. There's gotta be something here that clears Michael and points us toward the real shooter." As the two detectives began to compare their notes, it became clear that Drew's timeline didn't add up. Drew had claimed to have seen Michael at the scene, but there was no solid proof that Michael had even been near the location at the time of the shooting. Their investigation revealed that the security footage from the area had been conveniently erased, something that only raised more questions. Chase felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he realized that someone had gone to great lengths to cover up the truth. It wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was something more calculated, a deliberate attempt to frame Michael. The deeper they dug, the more they realized how carefully Drew had crafted his story. His claim that Michael had shot him seemed designed to throw them off course, to shift suspicion away from whoever had truly been behind the attack. Chase could see it. No, Drew had been trying to manipulate the investigation from the start. But why? What was his real motive? As they pieced together the fragmented details, Dante began to suspect that Drew's injuries hadn't been the result of an innocent attack. Instead, they might have been part of a larger, more complex scheme, one designed to destroy Michael's reputation and drive a wedge between him and his allies. Chase and Dante worked in tandem, each one digging through the evidence with a renewed sense of urgency. The hours passed in a blur as they cross-referenced every detail, every witness statement, and every piece of forensic evidence. They uncovered a significant lead that had previously been overlooked, a witness who had been at the scene of the shooting, but whose statement had been dismissed as unreliable. When they finally tracked down this witness, they were shocked by the revelation. The person had seen a figure leave the scene, but it wasn't Michael, it was someone else, someone who had been wearing a dark hoodie and had kept their face hidden. The witness had been too frightened to come forward earlier, but now, with the pressure mounting, they were ready to speak. Dante's mind raced as he processed the new information. It was clear now that Drew had been lying, but to what end? The more Dante thought about it, the more convinced he became that Drew had orchestrated the entire situation to frame Michael. But why target Michael specifically? What had Michael done to make Drew go to such lengths to destroy him? There were too many unanswered questions, and Dante knew that they were running out of time to uncover the full truth. Chase shared his partner's frustration but remained focused. They couldn't afford to let their emotions cloud their judgment. Every detail mattered now, and they had to stay one step ahead of Drew, who was undoubtedly watching their every move. With the new witness statement in hand and the mounting evidence against Drew, the detectives were finally starting to piece together a different version of events. Drew's carefully constructed story was unraveling, and the real shooter was starting to come into focus. But even as the truth seemed within reach, both Dante and Chase knew that the hardest part was yet to come, confronting Drew and exposing him for the mastermind he truly was. Fourth, Jason walked into the room with a somber expression, his face pale as if the weight of the news was physically bearing down on him. His presence was enough to silence the room, and everyone turned to him, sensing that something was wrong. He had just received the call from Tracy, and it was clear from his demeanor that it was not good news. The phone call had been brief but devastating. Monica, the beloved matriarch of the Quartermain family, had passed away. The news hit Jason like a freight train, and he knew he had to share it with everyone who cared for her. It was a moment of sorrow that would affect them all, and Jason felt the immense responsibility of delivering such a painful truth. As Jason spoke the words, his voice thick with emotion, the room fell into an eerie stillness. "Monica's gone," he said, his tone low and heavy. The words hung in the air, almost too painful to grasp. For a moment, it seemed as if no one could truly process what Jason had just said. Monica Quartermain had been a constant presence in their lives for so long. Her strength, her wisdom, her guidance. It was hard to imagine a world without her in it. Each person in the room reacted in their own way, but the shared grief was palpable. They all felt as though a vital piece of their lives had just been ripped away. Drew, who had been lying in the hospital bed recovering from his own injuries, was the first to break the silence. His face contorted in pain, a mix of physical discomfort and the anguish of the news he had just received. He had been through so much already fighting for his life, and now, hearing that his mother was gone, the grief was overwhelming. Drew had always been close to Monica, and the thought of never seeing her again was almost too much for him to bear. His heart sank as the reality of her passing set in. Without hesitation, he pushed himself up from the bed, his determination overtaking the physical pain that had kept him bedridden. He knew he needed to be there for the family, for the funeral, to honor the woman who had been both a mother and a guiding force in his life. Drew's urgency was clear as he started to gather his things, despite the doctor's warnings that he wasn't ready to leave the hospital. But there was no way Drew could stay in the sterile, quiet hospital room when his mother was gone. He needed to be with the family, to mourn, to say goodbye. His legs wobbled as he stood, but his resolve was stronger than any pain or discomfort he felt. Jason, who had been standing by, quickly moved to help him, offering support as Drew struggled to gather himself. The two men had been through so much together, and Jason knew that there was no way Drew would allow himself to miss this moment, no matter the consequences to his health. The journey to the funeral home was quiet, the weight of the loss heavy in the air. Drew's mind was consumed with thoughts of Monica. He couldn't fathom that she was truly gone. She had been there for him through so many pivotal moments in his life, offering love and support even when it seemed like there was no hope. Now, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Drew's heart ached for his mother, for all the times he had taken her presence for granted. He realized now, more than ever, how much she had shaped him into the person he was today. The guilt of not being there more for her in recent times gnawed at him. As the car made its way through the streets of Port Charles, Drew found himself struggling to hold back tears. His grief felt like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm him at any moment. But there was no time for tears, no time for self-pity. He needed to be strong for Monica, to honor her legacy. When the car finally stopped at the funeral home, Drew hesitated before stepping out. He was physically exhausted, emotionally drained, but this was the moment he had to face. Monica was gone, and he had to say goodbye in the way that felt most right. He had to be there for the family, to show that he was still part of them, still connected to the woman who had given him life and so much more. Inside, the funeral home was filled with mourners, all of whom were deeply affected by Monica's passing. There were faces Drew hadn't seen in years, old friends and family members who had come to pay their respects. The room was heavy with the scent of flowers and the quiet hum of conversations, as people whispered condolences and shared memories of Monica. Drew stood at the back of the room for a moment, taking it all in. The pain of loss was all around him, yet there was a strange sense of unity as well. Everyone had gathered to honor her life, and that brought Drew a small sense of comfort in the midst of his sorrow. Jason, who had followed Drew into the room, could see the turmoil in his friend's eyes. He knew how much this loss hurt, how deeply Drew was grieving, but there was little anyone could say to take that pain away. Jason placed a hand on Drew's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. They both knew that no words could capture the enormity of what they had just lost, but the presence of each other was enough for now. It wasn't just about mourning Monica, it was about standing together as a family, as a unit, and finding strength in the shared love they all had for her. As the service began, Drew took a deep breath, steeling himself for the difficult moments ahead, knowing that saying goodbye to his mother was only the beginning of a long journey of healing.